Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We'll let the rest of the people from the hallway come on in. My name is Carly Hubers, and I'm the program coordinator in the McGovern Center here at Dakota Wesleyan. On behalf of myself, Dr. Alicia Vincent, who's up here interviewing some of our friends tonight, as well as Eric Van Meter, who is up there in the sound booth with a lot of the other tech and campus ministries team. All of us would like to welcome you tonight to Stories of Refugees. Tonight, it is our hope that we can share in one small part of building connected community, and that is sharing stories. We're thrilled to be able to share with you pieces of a few refugee stories tonight. We hope tonight serves as an educational and an informative conversation. Before we begin, I did want to point out, some of you have already visited, but we have a table there in the back with an activity and a prompt that we'd like you to consider answering and participate in. You can pin right there to the board, so make sure to check that out. We also have a Twitter and Facebook hashtag, I'm learning all the little codes already, for this evening, and that's hashtag DWU Stories of Refugees. So if you hear something tonight that really sparks your interest, or there's something that you would like to share personally, feel free to go ahead and do that. You can tag Dakota Wesleyan in various places as well. There's also a sign-up sheet if you're interested in being a part of or hearing more about conversations like this one as we continue throughout the year. I know we all come here with different stories and experiences, but I invite you tonight to sit back and enjoy the conversations and the stories of some of our friends we have tonight. Thanks again for being here.
Around the globe, there are approximately 60 million people who have been forced to leave their homes to escape war, violence, and persecution. The majority of them have become internally displaced persons, which means they have fled their homes but are still within their own countries. Others have crossed a border and sought shelter outside of their own countries. They are commonly referred to as refugees. But what exactly does that term mean? The world has known refugees for millennia, but the modern definition was drafted in the UN's 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees in response to mass persecutions and displacements of the Second World War. It defines a refugee as someone who is outside their country of nationality and is unable to return to their home country because of well-founded fears of being persecuted. That persecution may be due to their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion, and is often related to war and violence. Today, roughly half the world's refugees are children, some of them unaccompanied by an adult, a situation that makes them especially vulnerable to child labor or sexual exploitation. Each refugee's story is different, and many must undergo dangerous journeys with uncertain outcomes. But before we get to what their journeys involve, let's clear one thing up. There's a lot of confusion regarding the difference between the terms migrant and refugee. Migrants usually refers to people who leave their country for reasons not related to persecution, such as searching for better economic opportunities or leaving drought-stricken areas in search of better circumstances. There are many people around the world who have been displaced because of natural disasters, food insecurities, and other hardships. But international law, rightly or wrongly, only recognizes those fleeing conflict and violence as refugees. So what happens when someone flees their country? Most refugee journeys are long and perilous, with limited access to shelter, water, or food. Since the departure can be sudden and unexpected, belongings might be left behind, and people who are evading conflict often do not have the required documents like visas to board airplanes and legally enter other countries. Financial and political factors can also prevent them from traveling by standard routes. This means they can usually only travel by land or sea and may need to entrust their lives to smugglers to help them cross borders. Whereas some people seek safety with their families, Others attempt passage alone and leave their loved ones behind with the hopes of being reunited later. This separation can be traumatic and unbearably long. While more than half the world's refugees are in cities, sometimes the first stop for a person fleeing conflict is a refugee camp, usually run by the United Nations Refugee Agency or local governments. Refugee camps are intended to be temporary structures, offering short-term shelter until inhabitants can safely return home, be integrated to the host country, or resettle in another country. But resettlement and long-term integration options are often limited. So many refugees are left with no choice but to remain in camps for years and sometimes even decades. Once in a new country, the first legal step for a displaced person is to apply for asylum. At this point, they're an asylum seeker and not officially recognized as a refugee until the application has been accepted. While countries by and large agree on one definition of refugee, every host country is responsible for examining all requests for asylum and deciding whether applicants can be granted the status of refugee. Different countries' guidelines can vary substantially. Host countries have several duties towards people they have recognized as refugees, like the guarantee of a minimum standard of treatment and non-discrimination. The most basic obligation towards refugees is non-refoulement, a principle preventing a nation from sending an individual to a country where their life and freedom are threatened. In reality, however, refugees are frequently the victims of inconsistent and discriminatory treatment. They are increasingly obliged to rebuild their lives in the face of xenophobia and racism. And all too often, they aren't permitted to enter the workforce and are fully dependent on humanitarian aid. In addition, far too many refugee children are out of school due to lack of funding for education programs. If you go back in your own family history, chances are you will discover that at a certain point, your ancestors were forced from their homes, either escaping a war or fleeing discrimination and persecution. It would be good of us to remember their stories when we hear of refugees currently displaced, searching for a new home.
All right, so our first speaker tonight is Ralph Helmuth. Ralph is a Dakota Wesleyan sophomore. He is a pre-med student, biochemistry major, and music minor. Ralph is on the Student Senate Executive Committee and the Pre-Med Committee, and sings in the college choirs. He has an interest in sports as well as technology and philosophy. Last summer, Ralph spent his time working in a refugee camp in Lesvos, Greece.
Thanks, Amy. We're really excited to hear your story tonight, Ralph. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll give you a moment just to share, if you wouldn't mind telling the audience a little bit about your experience this summer and some of the things that you did and learned about there.
Sure. Thanks, Alicia. Yeah, I was extremely blessed last summer when I had the opportunity to spend my whole summer, just a little over 3 months, in Lesvos, Greece. This is basically the view out of my back window. Beautiful island of Lesvos, and that's where I spent some of my free time when I had some. And so I was acting as assistant camp manager at Moria Detention Center. Used to be a refugee camp. I'll touch on that a little bit later. And so I was working for Euro Relief, and our organization was in charge of housing all the refugees. You know, we get new refugees in pretty much every day, and we would, put them in housing, according to their nationality, to keep the strife down. And so we did that, and we were also responsible for clothing everyone. Refugees would come in. Sometimes they were completely wet from, having their boat capsized on their way over from Turkey, and so we would take care of that, give them fresh clothing, and also everybody in the camp got an opportunity to get more clothing every week if they needed it. So that's kind of what I did. I was also acting as a liaison between the people, the refugees, and the police, as well as the military. The Greek police and the Greek military had a presence in the camp for security purposes and basic management. And so I would meet with them and discuss issues and solve conflict and, try to improve the life there through discussion there. So that's pretty much what my summer consisted of. I spent a lot of time building friendships. I made a lot of great friends. I was involved with a lot of conflict, but that was great too, because I was able to resolve a lot of conflict, and I was grateful for that experience. I did want to point out, while I remember, I don't know if any of you read the article in the Wesleyan Today. You might get from that article that these refugees are dangerous just because of all the conflict that's shared there. And while there is a lot of conflict, I attribute that to the incredible trauma that they went through and the horrific experiences that they've been to, and then being crammed, 30 different nationalities being crammed into this tiny camp and being forced to, just live there. And so I don't think it was out of line at all. I don't look at that as, throwing a bad light on, the people themselves. It was just, it was to be expected, I would say.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more, for those who don't know, why were they coming from Turkey? What were they leaving? What were they fleeing from? And what happened when they got to the refugee camp?
Sure. So, like I said, there were a lot of different nationalities. So the majority were Nigerian, Syrian, Iraqi, Pakistani, Afghani. And so you had a lot of different nationalities. That's just a couple of the major ones. Algerian. There was a lot of different nationalities, and they're fleeing their home country because of severe persecution. Most of them are fleeing dangerous militant groups that have threatened their lives. A lot of these families have lost immediate family, sometimes distant relatives, to these militant groups, and so they're fleeing because they know they're going to be next, and they really have no choice. So you have millions of the people migrating through their country and eventually ending up on the Turkish border. And if you go back to just a couple slides to that overview, there's a picture of Greece overlooking the Turkish border. One more back. Right there. So here we're on Greece, and in the distance there, it's about 5 miles. It's a narrow point. You've got Turkey. And so this is the crossing point. This is the major crossing point for millions of refugees. This was the hot spot, especially last year, starting in 2014 even. So late 2014, 2015. So you had, I think on an average, in 2015, there were 10 deaths per day in this crossing. Hundreds of refugees every day, at one point in the year, were crossing this strait of the Aegean Sea. And basically, once they get to Turkey and they need to cross here, they're stranded unless they get the help of a smuggler, because it's not legal to cross. And so they get the help of a smuggler. The smuggler promises them, great things. Only $2,000 to $4,000 per person, and we'll get you safe passage. But once they get down to the shores and get ready to get onto their boat, they see a little rubber raft with a small engine on it. And when they refuse to go because of the danger, especially when there's high water. Right now the sea is calm in that picture, but when there's high winds, you have really tall waves, and they're held at gunpoint and forced onto the boat. And often the fuel runs out a little bit into their journey over here. So it's a very, very dangerous crossing. There were a lot of lifeguards and a lot of patrol boats out, but there were still so many lives that were lost every single day in this crossing. So once they're lucky enough to make it onto the island of Lesvos, Greece, if they make it that far safely, then they're really at the hands of the Greek government, and it changed now. Right now, the Greek police will pick them up in police buses and bus them down to one of the camps. And then, because right now, as of March a year ago, Moria refugee camp, the camp I was at, turned into Moria detention center. And so it's no longer a camp, it's a detention center, because everybody that lands on these shores is automatically a prisoner, in essence. So after 25 days, they get to apply for asylum, and then after another couple weeks, then they get a paper to where they're now an asylum seeker. And so they're now no longer illegal, but before that, they're illegal.
So Ralph, give us an idea. You have people who are fleeing persecution, crossing this dangerous crossing, perhaps losing the life of a loved one, get to the other side, and now they're breaking the law. They get to the detention camp was a
Right.
refugee camp.
Right.
And what do they experience? What do they find there? What does that camp look like? How many people are in the camp? What have they gone from and gone into?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people are disappointed when they get to the camp, because they're hoping for something better. They're finally in Europe, and they're hoping for a better life, and then they get into this crowded camp. This camp is super small. I would say it might be, 4 acres. 4 acres is all that the main camp on this island is. And so they get into this camp, and they're held in this in a detention center until they get their papers processed, which usually takes about a day, and then they're given housing. But I would say that it only takes about a day or two for them to really start. Most of them are grateful for where they're at, for sure, because they've made it safely, and for now they're safe. But for the past year now, a lot of them are staying there for long periods of time, and this camp wasn't designed for that. They weren't expecting this. They were expecting to have this as a transit camp, which it was. A year ago, people came into this camp and stayed for 2 nights, 1 night, sometimes not even a night, and then they'd be shipped off to Athens, where they could, go on into Europe. But because of political reasons and a lot of other stuff going on, that can no longer happen, and so they're held there for months, and there's just so much uncertainty. And I think that's the biggest problem that these people face when they're in the camp, is all the uncertainty. Every single day they go down to the asylum office and, inquire about their paperwork, what's happening, is there anything happening? What's happening with all the Afghanis? All the Afghanis, they get word that, they're going to start processing Afghani paperwork. Well, and then it's just a rumor, and then everybody, gets restless. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, and they just really have no idea when they'll be granted access, to go on into Europe.
And the conditions of the camp: food, education, clothing, housing.
The education has been getting better. There's still no formal education, very, very minimal, but now there's English being taught to certain age groups. I don't think there's any English for little kids, and that's a huge problem. There's very little education there. That's one of the worst things, I would say. The food is tolerable. It's not the greatest, and we were trying to work on that. The Greek military was trying to work on that, but ultimately it goes to higher powers, and they've decided that this is the food they get. It's just a lot of pasta, which Middle Easterners aren't used to, and so that's kind of hard for them, but they cope. Living conditions, overall, it's relatively clean most of the time, unless the garbage people don't have funds or something, and then it kind of gets dirty and stinky. But overall, it's relatively clean. That camp was like the cleanest camp I heard in Europe. It was great compared to some of the other camps that were really, really filthy. So as far as living conditions, it was okay, not ideal for sure.
Ralph, what surprised you most? You're a student at Dakota Wesleyan from Alexandria and flew halfway around the world to take a summer job directing a portion of this camp. What did you walk into, and what surprised you the most when you were there?
It's a hard question, actually. I would say, I guess I was really shocked at how different it was from what the media portrays it sometimes, and I was really surprised to just see these individuals as, they were just like me. So often we get this idea that these people, they're from a different culture. Yes, that's true, but they have the same desires and goals that I do. A lot of these young guys that you're seeing here, they were my age or younger, and all they wanted is somewhere where they could get an education. I guess another thing that really surprised me is what seemed like a lack of cooperation from the Greek government, as well as the UN sometimes. The UN Refugee Council had a presence in the camp, and yet so many times it seemed like they didn't have the interests of the people in mind, and that really shocked me and frustrated me, I guess. For instance, we were dealing with a lot of single women in the camp, and during my 3 months that we were there, we knew of certain traffickers that would come into the camp and take women, and they would disappear, and we had about 60 women disappear in the 3 months that I was there. They weren't processed. None of the organizations do anything about it. Everything was just, they would disappear from camp, and we knew what was happening with them because of reports and stuff. So that was really sad, and that, I guess, irritating. Why can't we do something about this? Why can't we be on top of this? So
I imagine that there was a lot of hurdles and challenges. And also, sometimes, we look at these pictures, and I recognize that you can't take a lot of photos of the refugee camps because of privacy and security. But of course, these are all humans. Everyone in that camp represents a person. And I'm wondering if there's one or two stories that are most memorable for you, that really stood out to you, and made you stop and think.
Yeah. So if you would scroll back a couple pictures to that, to the two guys without me, yeah, right there. So this is Baram to the right, and his brother Arsh, and they were translators for us, just volunteered. They weren't paid anything. They just kind of, they got into the camp, and they knew English, and they also knew several other languages, which was helpful. And so they just kind of became our translators, one of our main translators. And so for a long time, I didn't realize what their story was. They both seemed to be pretty sad most of the time. And I couldn't, I just assumed, that they probably had rough things in their life and they were alone. And one day I took Barham out outside of camp, and we sat down with a Coke, and I wondered if he'd share his story with me, and so he did. And him and his brother are from Iraq, and when he was 12 years old, Arsh would have been about 10 or 9. They were out in town, and the rest of their family was at home. But while they were out in town, the rest of their family left their home and went into town, and there was a suicide bomber that blew up the whole area where his family was at, and his whole family was just basically blown to bits. And him and his brother, come onto the scene and see this. And after that, at 13 and 9 years old, and after that, everything makes sense. I think that's, I can understand everything, I no longer have to, I can understand a little bit of where they're coming from. And it more, so much more stuff makes sense. If you don't have the correct perspective in mind when you look at any situation, you're going to come away with the wrong idea of what's going on. And I think that's one of the biggest things to keep in mind when looking at this crisis and, especially dealing with individuals. A lot of times there was conflict and there was, people got upset at each other. And I would just always take a step back and realize, okay, where are these people coming from? What have they been through? And why are they upset? And it was so much easier to deal with the problem when you understood, where they were coming from and how much they had lost. There were so many other families that had lost children. One of my friends, can you go to the picture with all the guys? One of my close friends, he's all the way in the back, second from the left. His name's Adnan, and he was in the Syrian military at the age of 18. I think he's 22 right there. At the age of 18, and his best friend was captured by ISIS and beheaded, and his head was sent back to his mother in a box, and so his mother gets this, and so once just horrific things, and it alters their life forever. And so one of my biggest takeaways from the summer is let's do whatever we can to help them build their life back. It'll never be the same. They're always going to have, holes in their hearts from, lost loved ones. But let's do what we can on a personal level. It doesn't all have to be political. We can do stuff on a personal level with, refugee. I know we don't have like a lot of refugees in South Dakota, but there's things we can do, to help them, give them the opportunity to build their life back. One other quick little story. One day I was just, running around camp, doing my thing, and there was this little kid about probably a 7-year-old boy. And, I high-fived him, we kind of knew each other halfway. And he was just sitting on the hill really dejectedly. And he called me over, and so that was kind of surprising. He didn't usually do that. He was just sitting there and told me to sit down beside him. And so I just sat down beside him, and we just stared at the camp for a while. And then, then he started asking me in his broken English, why does it have to be like this? Why do people do bad things like this? Why are people bad? The basic questions of life. He was trying to grasp, at the age of 7, and I don't know. It really hit me. These kids are being forced to mature so rapidly, and they're dealing with adult problems, at the age of 5 and 6, and he just kept asking me these questions, and I didn't really have an answer. You just sit there and hug them and be there for them, but it's difficult.
As a mother, it's hard to imagine a child maybe motherless or fatherless or certainly away from comforts that they would have had in my own home. So thank you for that perspective. Mm-hmm. Ralph, any final thoughts as we conclude our time with you on the stage tonight?
I just encourage everyone. I know there's a lot of political stuff going on with refugees and the resettlement of refugees right now, and everybody has their own opinion on this. Everybody has a right to their own opinion. I think that's great. But I would encourage everyone to take initiative in your own life. Do one thing. Go out, do one thing that actually has an impact on somebody else's life. If you can volunteer somewhere, that's great. There's tons of opportunities that you can volunteer. abroad, even in places in the States, you can volunteer. There's a lot of need for people to help out with this crisis. And so instead of just, trying to fix this issue politically by posting, political articles on Facebook, which sometimes that's necessary, let's go out there and just do one thing. If every one of us would do one thing to personally help with this crisis, I think we'd see real change in our community.
Thank you. Thanks, Ralph.
Thank
Ralph
you.
will be available afterwards, too, if you have additional questions for him about his time this summer. And I think you have some other family members who have also been there and will be available maybe to chat afterwards as well. We're going to take this moment to transition to our next speaker, and I can draw your attention up to the screen. Thank you.
All right, our second speaker tonight is Thomas Madoot. Thomas was born in South Sudan. After the Civil War broke out in the country, Thomas left and went to Kenya until he could eventually come to the United States. Thomas now works at Dakota Wesleyan University as a success advisor and peer mentor program coordinator of TRIO Student Support Services. He also is a direct support professional at LifeQuest here in Mitchell.
And Amy forgot to mention that Thomas has also run the Boston Marathon many times, and last weekend during the Alumni Mile on campus, he lapped me twice while running the mile. Thanks, Thomas, for being here today. We're excited to hear about your story, and we'll start there. Like Ralph, if you could just give us some perspective on what home was for you and your experience as a refugee.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity for being here today. And I just want to say thank you, Alicia, for the opportunity. And also thank you to Carly for giving me the opportunity to be here tonight. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate this opportunity. And thank you also for your time for being here tonight. First of all, I was born in South Sudan, as you already heard. And I moved to the United States in 2001 as refugees from South Sudan. Before long, I was in South Sudan, as I was born in South Sudan, staying there with my family. And during that time, the conflict broke away in South Sudan. There was a war going on between South and North Sudan. And this war had been there for many, many decades. And that time, as we were sleeping at night, it was my whole family, it came like a dream where our family, we were sleeping and there was an attack coming from all different directions. And there was fire, there was a war going on at that time. There was bullets and everything shooting just like 4th of July. At that time, I was very young, and I was very small, about 5 years old. And we got really scared. I just took off running different direction. My family ran different direction. And as we were leaving the country, we just pretty much in a crowd with a number of people that we did not even know or related to. And so from South Sudan, we traveled to a country called in Kenya, in East Africa, where I was located in Kakuma refugees camp for a number of years before coming to the United States. At that time, when I was in Kakuma refugees camp, I did not stay with my family, and my family were not with me either. I was just friends and some people that were also displaced from their home town as well. So United Nations was the one who was in charge with our lives, basically. We did not have our family with us. Friends and parents were not with us at that time. So I was with two of my brothers, my family, my mom and my dad. Both of them were not with us. During that time, we got separated. We went a different direction. My parents went a different direction. We did not know at that time whether they were okay or not until we got to Kakuma Refugees Camp. My brother was also in crowd at that time, traveling the same direction. And as we were going, United Nations put us in Kakuma Refugees Camp as we were in the country of Kenya. And this place called Location, that's where we were. So we were there for a while. We were loading a truck to take us to a place called Kakuma Refugees Camp, where we spent a number of years. United Nations was providing an education for us and also providing the food that we need and also the shelters that we need at the time we were in Kakuma Refugees as well. In the meantime, there was no communication as far to find out where our family were, or our family knew where we were at that time as well. So we tried to communicate with them through Red Cross, where we can send messages to our family back home in South Sudan. We never get a fly back as far our family were okay, or we don't know if they got the message we tried to reach them. We were not sure at that time. While we were in Kakuma Refugees Camp, the life was really difficult. As far as the things, the shelters, the food, and also the lifestyle, because we do not have our family with us at that time. We were living with some friends and also relatives or some other people that we never related to at that time. When the time came in 2001 or before that, United Nations provide opportunity where they say we want to make sure these refugees give them opportunity to go to the United States. I was one of the many, many refugees at that time got opportunity to go through the process where I was able to come to the United States of America through Lutheran Social Services Agency in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And the time that I came through Lutheran Social Services, I did not know anybody in South Dakota. No, I'd never been here before. The weather was really difficult. It was so cold, and that was one of the scariest things I ever been to exposed to snow. People always say, what was the scariest thing? I would say snow. That was the scary thing for me. Long story short, so when we came, I was in apartment with three other refugees from South Sudan as well that we just met in Kakuma Refugees Camp. And we were stationed in Sioux Falls. Lutheran Social Services was in charge as far as that opportunity for us to find maybe work or also the school and opportunity like that. So at that time, I was placed in a foster home. And this foster family home, which is I call her Mom Chair Johnson, she was a volunteer for a number of years to working with refugees who came to South Dakota before me and many other refugees as well. So, and as I came, many of you maybe have heard a term called Lost Boys of Sudan before. You may not. So I was among the Lost Boys of Sudan. And that term, due to the facts that we got separated from our families and moved just traveling, as I mentioned, from South Sudan to East Africa and Kenya, or going to Uganda in African country as well. That's where the term came, because majority of people were pretty much young boys and also a few lost young girls as well along the journey as well. Due to the fact that people were fleeing the country, going to seek opportunities and for a better life. Simply, that's one of the reasons people were living, just to be alive from prosecution and the war which was taking place in South Sudan across between North and South Sudan. people just simply run away to escape the war, and that was a goal, to just stay alive. Whether you were with your family or not, it was not by choice. This is something that what a war can do to a human being, to do impossible thing that you could not imagine of doing it, and such a thing like that.
So Thomas, you fled. You had to flee your house in the middle of the night because of the war, and then you wound up in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. Stayed there for a while before going through all the processes to wind up in South Dakota and confront the snow head on, right? But tell us about the journey from your house to Kakuma refugee camp. If you haven't before watched the film The Lost Boys of Sudan, I would encourage you to go find that on Netflix or Amazon Prime, whatever you use. And you make a little appearance in that film. You're not one of the primary characters, but you do make an appearance in the film eventually, I think. But if you could tell the audience a little bit about the journey from your home in the middle of the night and to the camp itself. What was that like for you?
It was really very difficult. As far, can you imagine getting up in the morning and then just pretty much took off without your parents, without your siblings, brothers or sisters? It was really difficult. As I mentioned before, that's what a war can do. It can force you to do something that impossible to do. So during the journey from South Sudan traveling to Kenya in East Africa or in Uganda, it was not a smooth transition where you just pack your stuff and just get up and I'm leaving. It's not as simply like you packing your stuff for a vacation. You take your cell phone, take your favorite shirts, shoes. There was not a lot of choices, basically. You have to get up and took off running basically for your life. With what you got on, that's all. You don't have any opportunity to pick any belongings, any shoes, or your cell phone. Can you imagine to just being away for just a couple hours without your cell phone? It's just like your life feels being cut off. But this is what a war can do, and this is a real life situation. So at that time, traveling from South Sudan to Kenya, this is not like going to North Dakota. This is a different country, traveling by foot. And we're traveling at night to avoid any conflict because the war is not done yet. They're just following us, the cross country. The whole entire country is in war. And it's just coming with tank, gunship, helicopter, and anything like that. So people are trying to flee at night to try to walk in a group where they can avoid the animals, wild animals that can eat people as well. People can die from the thirst. People can die from hunger. There's no food. You don't have enough for people to eat as well. So people are traveling for a safe journey, for a better life, just to be alive, simply. So this is not a week, not a day. This is a journey of a couple of weeks, couple of months to get to the other country from Sudan to Kenya. It was a long journey. People did not have food or not enough water to drink at that time. So a lot of people lost their life throughout that journey as well, due to the thirst, due to the illness, due to the long exhaustion, like walking so long for so many time and everything. So during that time, we made it to Kakuma refugee camp. Whatever you have on, the shoes or the shirt, that's pretty much it. There was no communication, finding out we're just shooting for a different country. And we were received by United Nations when we get to Kakuma refugee camp. Kind of similar to what Ralph already mentioned it. If you were lucky enough to get to where your destination is, the United Nations took us in the Kakuma refugee camp, where we played there for a while until they find a place in Kenya where they can have camp and shelter for lost boys of Sudan to use it at the time being. So.
A harrowing experience, I'm sure. Scary, especially as a young boy, to make that journey. We're really glad that you made it, Thomas, for one thing. But also, I have some questions. So it took a couple years, or at least several months, for things to process at the refugee camp before they finally said, okay, Thomas, now you have a visa and you're going to be able to go to the U.S. You've described a little bit about encountering the snow, but what was the hardest part of adjusting from being South Sudanese to all of a sudden being on American soil?
I would say that my experience has been tremendous positive. And through those people who dedicate themselves to make an impact in other people's lives, Ralph mentioned earlier. So those people were pretty much Mom Chair Johnson, she had refugees from Iraq, from Kurds, from anywhere from Vietnam, where they used to be called boat people. The people were pretty much fleeing from Vietnam to come to the United States. She worked with them. And those who were in Lutheran Social Services were case managers and volunteers that made opportunity for people like myself to bring us in, where they give the opportunity to go to school. They offer some ESL classes as well, and also for a better opportunity, better life. And these people dedicate themselves to be able to take the opportunity and recognize the needs each of us as at that time when we came to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And from that transition, where I got an opportunity to go to high school in Sioux Falls and Lincoln, and I was placed in a foster home with Terry and Doc Johnson, who I love them dearly, as my parent, like my own family. Good thing can come out sometime, a bad thing come out sometime, good thing. So those people like Sherry Johnson give themselves enough time to have room in their heart to bring somebody like myself in and also help them other refugees. It was a really positive opportunity to make impact in my life, and being there as my second parents, to me, it was really tremendous and was greatly, really needed at that time, being here.
And although we have this idea or maybe misperception that once you're here, it's going to be all roses and things are going to be fantastic and wonderful, and now you have the land of opportunities, right, flowing with milk and honey. But has there been challenges? Is that a misperception? And what do you miss most about home, South Sudan?
Definitely there's has been challenges. As for number one is my family. I love my family dearly, my parents, my brothers, and I miss the opportunity where growing up where my family can see me, my dad or my mom, to be there for my younger brothers or sister, to be a big brother, to be there to protect them, to be there to help them, to lead them by example. I miss that really tremendously. And also meet the opportunity where my parent can look at me and be a proud parent, be looking at me and say, we did a good job raising him, or not so good. To give them an opportunity to see that I really miss the opportunity where spending time with my family, being able to go to bed at night to tell them, I love you very much, to express my love, that how much I appreciate them and proud for the opportunity they gave me. So I miss that a lot, but having great friends and opportunity like Dakota Wesleyan, I really appreciate that for the opportunity that I got when I came here running track and cross country when I got scholarship and went to Dakota Wesleyan University. Received my degree in Bachelor in Human Services, coaching my endorsement, and went back for my master here at Dakota Wesleyan University to come back now to say I'm also an alumni for Dakota Wesleyan and also working on campus. To give that opportunity back was simply to say thank you for the opportunity. For those who make difference in my life before, that's a simple way to pass on the baton, to say I'm here if I can make a small impact in your life, even make you smile, and then I know I make impact. So thank you for the opportunity.
And we know that you're making an impact in a lot of lives here too in your job. Thanks, Thomas. I know that there's a lot of younger students in the audience who are probably really curious to know what happened to your family. Did they find their way back to their home, and what's going on in South Sudan now?
After all, from the conflict between South and North Sudan at the time, now South Sudan is now independent, and it had its own nation right now. So from being Sudan now, after the conflict took place and people decided they want to have their freedom, so now South Sudan is a country, it's not still as the Sudan. So I just want to clarify that. after the long war, longest war in the decades, which is over 21 years conflict going on between North and South Sudan. Now they finally got independence, where South Sudan now is its own nation and have opportunity. So it's not 100%, there's a lot of conflict going on, and that's because it's a young nation. You know, it's still inexperienced. There's so many things that are needed. You know, counseling is needed, people are needed. The bad experience that they're exposed to is not going to take overnight to change them and become happily independent country. There's a lot of things need to be dealt. And right now, things are going okay, and my family are doing okay as well. I was over there this summer. I spent a couple of months there to spend time with my family, and they're doing okay. Each day I try to reach out to them, to call them and talk to them when I'm able to, and they do the same thing to check on me. So,
Thomas, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience tonight about your experience or your experience with the refugee process?
I would say that somebody along the line make an impact in my life through the journey that we took from South Sudan, walking in a group of the people that dedicate themselves and want to help other people, help people like myself. I was 5 years old when I was traveling this journey. I could not have made it on my own. But for those who dedicate themselves to lend a hand to myself, to many other people also were going through a journey, it was really needed at that time as well. And being as a refugee and things that I exposed to and things that I've been to, and being in Kakuma refugees camp for a number of years before I come to the United States, it was not an easy transition. So that, you know, there was some people that I know are still in Kakuma refugees camp even up to today. Not everybody got opportunity to come to the United States. That's the process, and this process involves a lot of people dedicate themselves. That there's a agency called Joint Volunteer Agency. It's also involving in helping refugees. These are individuals dedicate themselves to make sure the process goes smooth as possible, and also to helping these people lend them hand. This was part of the process that helped me and many other people to come to the United States. So it was a long process. There's so many things you have to go through, medical, physical, anything. You know, basically it's almost like going to medical school. Not to that extreme, but at some point to be able to come to the United States. So it was a really long process. It took a number of years to go through the process, to be able to say, yeah, you check off all the things they needed, expected it to come to the United States and be here. So I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'm grateful for the people who dedicate themselves to give me opportunity to be part of my life, and I just want to thank them so much.
Thank you, Thomas. We're so glad you're here. Continually voted the best dressed on campus, too, I might add.
I think it goes to Ralph, not me. Thank
you so much. Thomas will also be available afterwards. I'm going to draw your attention back to the screen for a few more slides while we bring the next and final speaker to the stage.
All right, our last speaker is Miss Clara Hart. Clara Hart fled Mozambique in the 1960s in fear of political persecution. She was resettled to the United States in 1988 and currently lives in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She completed her degree in political science shortly after her arrival, and she has taught cultural competency to nursing students for the past 10 years. Ms. Hart also participates in many civic and volunteer organizations and co-founded the Refugee Women's Association of Sioux Falls. Ms. Hart has run for political office twice and is most proud contributing to her community through her ongoing activism against anti-refugee bills introduced in the legislature. She served on the board of directors for United Way, Sioux Falls Arts Council, and is the chair board for Refugee Congress, a national board that was founded by refugees for refugees.
Thanks, Amy. And welcome, Clara. We're so glad to have you here, and we look forward to having you share your story. We'll start there tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Alicia and Carly. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. I'm used to being in a classroom with middle schoolers. When I hear it. Well, I'm just so humbled to be here this evening and share with you my story. And my story is different from Ralph and Thomas a little bit, but I couldn't help choking up a few times from their perspectives and from hearing your story. I'm 58 years old, and I never get tired of hearing those kind of stories. I hope someday we will not have to have this problem. Where do I start? Just my story. As you heard from the introduction, I became a refugee at the age, in 1960s. I was 8 years old. My parents and I left my country of Mozambique. The reason was, in the 60s, Mozambique was under the colonial rule. And my dad got in trouble because he was helping people living in Mozambique for other countries to seek asylum and join the liberation movement, which is still ruling Mozambique now, the Frelimo Party. And what my parents did is host all those people that were fleeing from Mozambique by staying overnight in our home. My dad was a teacher and a principal, so we lived on the school compound. So these families would leave their homes because the underground network, we were one of those in those days. And they would come to our home and spend the night there. I remember sometimes these families would have children my age. I'd be so happy to have other kids come to our area, the compound, and play with them, only to be gone the next day. It happened several times, and I did not know what was going on. And I remember asking my parents one time, where those people were going, and wanted to be told to zip it up. And I always say, when I give this talk, in those days when your parents told you to do this, you didn't assert your First Amendment right. You listened. So after that, we didn't ask any questions anymore until my dad was arrested. Somebody did report him that he was harboring people who were leaving the country. So he was, and it was illegal in those days under colonial rule for anybody to leave the country and join the liberation movement that would come back and overthrow the Portuguese colonial rule. And for that, you were noted as an enemy of the government or the country or the rule. So my dad got arrested, and he was able to jump out of a moving train. He saved himself that way, and then after a few days or weeks, he made it back to our home. And since he worked for the Catholic priests or Catholic missionaries, he was asked to turn himself in because the Portuguese government is still looking for him. He's considered an enemy of the government and someone that fled from the law. So he should turn himself in. So he had to go to some place called Tete, which is 100 miles from where we were. And once he got to Tete, he lived on the bishop's compound, only to go to the court every day to have his case heard. Nothing happened. They kept telling him, "Oh, Marcus, come tomorrow, come tomorrow." And since he was teaching, so the school that he taught was closed because there was no one else that was teaching. I was, at the age of 8, I was in 3rd grade. So for almost a whole year, I didn't have a place to go to school. But I was able to go to at least for 2 months. But going back to my dad, going to court every day to have his case heard, only to be told that, oh, we'll come back tomorrow. And after 1 month, he got so bored, he asked the bishop if he could have his family come and join him. So we were taken to Tete and rejoined with my parents, and with my dad, sorry. So once we got to Tete, and we lived on the bishop's compound, I remember before we got to the compound, we took a ferry on River Zambezi, and the priest that was accompanying us, Father Torino, I remember him, a short little guy from Italy, he asked us to look up at the building that was up on a hill, a bright white mansion surrounded by just beautiful greenery. I did not know what that was. And he said, do you see that building over there? That's where your dad is. And I thought, if it is not so bad. I think dad should be arrested quite often if we can live in a place like that. So it's a young mind. I didn't know what was going on. So once we got picked up by someone from the ferry, we traveled up to the bishop's compound. We were dropped off the gate, and then we were told to get in, and we were walking around the vineyard, and my eyes were still looking at the mansion. And as we went around one corner, there was a little building, and then this person came out at the door, and we all looked, and it was my dad in this shack. And then I thought, what is he doing here? Why is he not up there? Well, more shocks to come. And that evening, my dad made some porridge, or had porridge in English, or here you call them grits. And so had made us some hard porridge and beans full of bugs. They were old beans. And that's what we had every day, three times a day, for breakfast, lunch, and supper. So I decided to create a sort of a way to cope with this, because you can't eat this same thing every day. We were used to having tea in the morning with bread and a nice heavy lunch and a nice light supper. So I decided that I would go out every day. The bishop's window was open, and they would make this wonderful breakfast. You could smell bacon, you could smell some other good things cooked in olive oil. And I thought, this is what I'm gonna do to survive. Every morning I would get up and inhale that nice aroma from that window and go back and eat that crappy food that we had. So I managed to survive that way. So there were 5 of us then, children. The youngest, his name is Job, and he was quite a job. And at 12 midday, Job would just run around the vineyards and screaming. I mean, he was just a little boy. And I always joke that if he had grown up in this country, he would have been placed on Ritalin because he had too much energy. So he would run around the compound. We did not know the bishop took his nap or siesta. In other countries, people take naps at lunchtime, which is good. Try it sometime. And the bishop's window was just below our hut. And by Job screaming, he kept the bishops up. So he didn't have a good siesta. So after a while, he said, I cannot take this. You guys, I think you should rent a place outside the compound so then I can take my nap. It turned out to be a wonderful thing because we rented a nice place with 3 bedrooms, and my dad was able to get a job where we had breakfast, eggs, bread, tea, and for lunch we had rice and fish, and in the evening sweet potatoes and beans probably. And then while he was working, he would still go to court every day. So one evening, we were so bored because there was no school this whole time. I decided to take my siblings, my young siblings, to go out on the street and watch cars. That's how bored we were. That was entertainment. So I remember my mom telling me, Clara, please watch Job. Don't take him with you. Oh, Mom, I'll watch for him. Well, here we are watching cars. So I remember it was just in a flashlight. Job took a rock, and I remember him twisting it and throwing it. And there was a cars passing by, but that rock hit one car, a Fiat, a red one, I still remember. Once he hit it, the driver came to a halt, and he got out. So we started running. We ran with like our lives depended on it. Went straight in our house, and the guy was following us. We passed my parents in the living room. We went right, hid somewhere else. So this gentleman came right in the house and asked if we were their children. And both my parents could not say anything. I was listening, not that I could see anything. And they said yes. And this gentleman said, you need to watch for your children because they hit my car. And he left. My dad that evening was so sad. I found out later from Mom, who was also sad, that the car that Job hit belonged to the prosecutor that was prosecuting my dad's case. So that was the worst night we ever had. And I thought, I'm going to be responsible for my dad's not coming back to us because I was responsible for taking Job, who did the damage. But yes. So the next morning, he was expected, of course, to go to court. Once he arrived, he was told that his case has been dropped, then he can go back home. I don't know why. But then we celebrated. We went back to our hometown, and he started teaching. But after 2 months, he got another note from the bishop asking him to leave the country alone right away because they're still looking for him. They haven't dropped the charges entirely. So my parents decided that they were not going to listen to what the bishop is asking him to leave all by himself. We should leave all together. So we left one early morning, I still remember it, stepping out of our house and walking through bushes. And when we heard people coming towards us, we would just hide in the bushes and not breathe, because Dad was the only teacher in this area for hundreds of miles. So he was well known. And if one person saw him and saw us, then they would know something was happening, because there were a lot of people who were fleeing Mozambique in those days to go and join the liberation movement. And Dad had been gone, and people knew he's a fugitive, so we didn't want to give that away. So we walked from Mozambique until we got to the border of Malawi and Mozambique. So once we got to the border, my dad told my mom that we should go in first, and then he can wait. We got to the border, and my mom was told what to say. Just say, you're going to see your family, because the people who lived on the border, their dialect from the Mozambique side and Malawi is similar. And there are so many relatives on the other side. So that was what Mom's directions. So we get to the border, the immigration officer asked my mom, what's your purpose of visiting Malawi? The poor woman did not know how to lie. She just did not know what to say. And the officer was starting to get really annoyed by her. At that time, I saw the grasshopper that landed on his nice, well-ironed white shirt. The big, have you ever seen a grasshopper? The big ones? You won't forget it. So I looked, when I saw it, I was tugging at my mom's skirt to look at me, but she kept ignoring me. So eventually she looked at me, I said, so she looked, I said, so she saw that grasshopper and told the officer that he has something on his shoulder. When Mom told him that, he was so disgusted. He swept it off, and he said, now you can go. So I tell people the story that we were saved by the grasshopper. Without that, I would not be here telling that story. So that was the beginning of our journey, and we ended up we got to Malawi. After a few weeks, we were told to go to Tanzania. Once we got to Tanzania, we were placed in a refugee camp. We lived in a refugee camp for 3.5 years. And once we got there, we shared a house, one-roomed bedroom and one living room with another single mom. She's Mozambican, but she's from the north part. The Makondis, they had some like decorations on their faces. So my mom was told that this tribe, they eat human flesh, so she needs to watch the woman, not to fall asleep because one of us will be gone. So my mom would get up in the morning, this poor woman, when she turned, she would say, I'm watching you. If you touch one of my children, I'll kill you. In Portuguese, they could communicate in Portuguese. And this woman did not understand what was going on. After a while, we were kicked out of the house, and we ended up in this rotten building, no roof. So when it rained, the water came right through. So what we would do is we would put a bucket right in the middle to catch the water, because it was far to get to walk to where we got fresh or clean water. And then we'll get up, huddle in the corner, and back that. So my dad, I forgot, once we got to Tanzania, we were separated. The men and single women and single men were placed in a military refugee camp so they can fight the Portuguese back home. And women with children and older men were placed in the refugee camps. So we were separated. They didn't tell us where my dad was. For 3 years, we didn't see each other until and then we didn't know my mom was expecting. She was pregnant after she had the baby. I would communicate with my dad, but so we let him know that the baby was born and her name is Agatha, and that was the name that my dad had in mind. Should mom have a baby? If it's a girl, that's the name that he chose. And I gave that name to my sister, not knowing that was my dad's wish. So after 3 years in the refugee camp, my dad left the liberation movement. We found out it was a very corrupt system. So we had to run away again, ran away to Kenya. We ended up, that was hard, applying for refugee status in Kenya. While we were in the refugee camps, we were not considered refugees, we were asylees, but belonging to a liberation movement. So we were not really considered refugees. But so the school in a refugee camp was non-existent. So I wasted a lot of time. There were so many kids who showed up at this one building. There would be 100 kids for 70 seats. So it was hard to learn. And I was at 3rd grade and being in a classroom with people who had not been to school before. They were 15 years old, and it was hard. And after that, we escaped and got to Kenya. We applied for refugee status. for 2 weeks, my dad would go to UNHCR in Nairobi and tell the same story. And you know, when you're telling a story, you have to be consistent. If it missed, or you missed something or added something, that was grounds for disqualification. But after 2 weeks of just stress, on my dad's side, we was given asylum in Kenya. And we lived in Nairobi, Kenya for 19 years, and in Sudan, South Sudan for 4 months, and Zaire, Congo, for 6 months, and went back to Kenya. In 1987, we applied for resettlement to come to United States, but we didn't leave Nairobi until 1988. Our health papers and medical records that we had almost expired. Once we got to JFK, we were quarantined, and we were destined to go to San Diego, but we missed our flight because we had to get all the paperwork. The medical examination in New Jersey, after 4 days, we were cleared and ended up in San Diego. After 1 year in San Diego, we ended up in South Dakota. People ask me, am I crazy? And so the snow story, I have a snow story, but I'll let you ask a question.
Well, I was just, home for you bounced around from country to country for several years. And one of the things, I know we're running short on time, we need to move forward, but one of the questions that I really wanted to ask and have you address was just the idea of process. And so especially again for the younger, I know we have some middle schoolers in the audience, so we, I think, have this idea where I can go someplace and apply and be here in a few months. And while that might work if I want to be tourist and go someplace, for a refugee, the process itself is so laborsome. Yeah. If you could just give us a quick summary of process, and I know that you work with refugees all the time, every day, as an ambassador and an advocate. So how is that process for them?
Well, I'll talk from my personal experience, and also I can add what is happening recently, what has changed. You apply for resettlement at the U.S. Embassy, and you just wait to hear from the State Department if you've been accepted or not. But I remember there were 30-something families that had applied for resettlement in 1987. Out of that 30-something, only my family, mine and my ex-husband, not my immediate family, but by this time I had 2 daughters. Both my daughters were born in Kenya. And in those days in Nairobi, Kenya, there were no refugee camps. We lived in flats or apartments here. There were not many refugees that necessitated the government to build refugee camps at all. And so we applied. After 1 month, we heard from the State Department, my family, that we've been accepted to come to US and we should start getting ready. So that means you have to get your medical exams, and if you had the chest X-rays, and if there was any trace of TB or anything, that was disqualification. And another, they did a thorough background check. If you had any criminal record, for example, you would not come here. That started so many years ago. And there was just a lot of paperwork that has to be done. And the last thing, once you passed all these tests, you have to apply for a loan that is through International International Organization of Migration, IOM. This is the organization that provides a loan to every refugee. No government pays for refugees to fly anywhere for resettlement. No. If you hear anybody say that the government pays for refugees to come here, no. So for example, if you have 7 children and plus mother and father, we're looking at